Welcome back, Sports Phone KNBR. John Dickinson with you here on a Wednesday. More phone calls coming up. 808 KNBR, the number, 415-808-5627. But right now we switch gears, talk a little Warriors basketball with the man who covers them on a daily basis. And, of course, that is Joseph Dycus of the Bay Area News Group, and we appreciate his time joining us here on the Sports Leader. Joseph, how are you, my friend? Great to speak with you here for a few minutes.
I am doing well. I did not think we would be talking a lot about the Warriors in August, but the most interesting team in basketball, never stops. So plenty of Warriors to talk about.
Yeah, plenty of Warriors to talk about. And, yeah, we are about to enter what I think is the legitimate dead zone of the NBA schedule in the lead up to training camp, really that month before training camp or 6 weeks before training camp. But you got to get the NBA schedule out first. And so that's still to come here coming up on Thursday. And I know Mike Dunleavy had a media availability, kind of a midsummer media availability with free agency basically done. And so I want to get into that a little bit here with you and just kind of the overall offseason with the Warriors as well, because there are still a couple of matters of business ahead for Golden State. But I think the big topic is just how similar this Warriors roster is going to be come when they open training camp at the end of September compared to when they got beat in Phoenix going back to April and the play-in tournament. How stunned are you, given the way the Warriors themselves, whether it was Steve Kerr, Mike Dunleavy, players up and down the roster, that they are essentially running back the same team, plus obviously their first-round draft pick in Yaxel Lindebord?
I'm very surprised considering what we heard from Steve Kerr himself, where he said we can't do it again, where they have guys who aren't playing back-to-backs and they have certain guys who play on certain days or can only play so many minutes that they have to get younger. And by bringing back essentially every player from last year, they have actually gotten older because they're all a year older now. It's surprising because not like the main guys, Steph, Draymond, those guys, they're going to be there. What I'm more surprised about is bringing back Al on a 2-year deal, bringing back Melton. Not quite a surprise. He's in his prime. I guess that's a solid get. But like Kristaps Porzingis is back on a 2-year deal. These are players that I was wondering if maybe they try to shake it up in that regard. Because the way it is now, Mike Dunleavy talked about it yesterday. They're kind of banking on health because they think as he put it, they valued the talent of these players over maybe they're not going to be the most healthy, but we have a good medical staff that can stay healthy. Which asking Al Horford and Kristaps Porzingis and DeAnthony Melton, who played a combined one back-to-back last year, to be healthy, that's asking a lot.
It truly is, and that's the thing that I would ask of you next is how realistic is it? Because in the same vein, and I listened back to Mike Dunleavy's little call with a lot of the beat writers and other media folks. I was still down at the 49er joint practice, and so I couldn't quite hop on that call.
Wasn't he down there too?
Yeah, he was. I don't know if he did the call with you guys there, but he was at the joint practice as the 49ers went up against the Titans on Tuesday. Yeah, he was out on the field and taking in a little of that practice and talking to – I should have got my one-on-one with him, Joseph. I should have tried to get my one-on-one ahead of the call there. That you guys were able to have. But I get there were two things that stood out. It was the fact that he said that they chose talent over maybe the potential or with the risk of a lot of the guys they chose who are talented being able to stay healthy. And of course, obviously also having Jimmy Butler and Moses Moody starting the season, missing at a minimum, it would feel like half the season. And then he also added something else that I found interesting, which is, hey, we really have to get off to a good start, which I think would be understandable, going back through the last couple of years. But I just, and we'll find out more maybe with the schedule on Thursday and the release, but how realistic is the bet that the Warriors are going to be able to stay healthy with the roster that they've assembled? And how realistic is that good start for the same reason?
I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm all sunshine and rainbows here, but like I don't see how anybody could think that this team's going to stay healthy. I mean, it's you're asking players who have, especially like the ones I mentioned, that are known to be injury prone. That's just the track record to stay healthy. I mean, when they haven't shown they can do that, and then Steph Curry has his runner's knee that Mike Dunleavy has said they're gonna manage that. They're going to look at that. He's going to be 39. How many 39s do you know can play 70 games, 65 games, right? Draymond Green's dealt with back, was it back and all these different little injuries just because he's been playing against guys who weigh 50 pounds more than him for his entire career. I would be stunned if they stayed healthy, if you had mostly the same roster available for the entire year. I mean, it's just, can you expect 38-year-old Steph, 37-year-old Draymond, to be 38-year-old Jimmy Butler coming off a knee injury, Moses Moody coming off a knee injury, Al Horford, who hadn't played a back-to-back in 2 years, Kristaps Porzingis hadn't played a back-to-back in several years. I mean, that's like half the roster that I've just listed.
Well, how do you think, I mean, is it fair to put on Steve Kerr to try and manage it? Because I think a lot of the belief that this team could be better than they were, let's say, to close the season after the Jimmy Butler injury. And look, Steph missed most of that time too. So getting Steph back obviously makes him a better team than whatever they were, 13-26 or whatever it was roughly in the final half of the season, where they were basically winning, a third of their games. So Steph is going to help mitigate that. But how difficult a task is it going to be for Steve Kerr to, one, manage the roster when it's fully healthy, but also on a night in, night out basis, work in, well, this guy needs his night tonight, and that means this other guy gets his night the next game. It just seems like an awful lot to blend, and you're almost assuming that everybody else, not name the guys who immediately go into that protocol, so to speak, are going to remain healthy. Otherwise, the whole thing could really fall apart very quickly.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's like having to do a puzzle where every night different pieces you're only working with so many pieces, I look, if there's any coach that can do it, it's Steve Kerr. He's he showed last year, he is willing to try literally anything with whatever he's got. There was a game late in the year where they played Nate Williams at 6'5". They're like, let's just throw him out center or power forward when they were playing Wembanyama. Now, it didn't work very well, but it was like he was working with what he had. I don't really see them staying healthy, like you said, but also, like you also said, you're also saying that, okay, well, Brand Pajemski, he played 82 games last year. He was the one guy you could rely on to be in their lineup every single year. Well, before that, he was playing, 65 games, I think, or thereabouts each of the first 2 years. Was that a aberration, or is Brand Pajemski an Iron Man now? Guy Santos plays a style that is very taxing on the body. Gary Payton II, he played 72 games last year. That was a career high, but usually he's not someone that's going to just play every single night because he throws his body around and he's crashing the glass, right? So the guys that did stay healthy, can you realistically expect them to do it again? I don't know. And they still have, I believe it is 2 more roster spots to fill, but they're up against that second apron. They're up against that apron, the first apron, and they're going to have to look at, okay, we only have basically the veteran minimum to use. And then Warriors fans, are you going to just put it out there? You're not going to get a star with that. You may not even get you're probably not going to get a starter level player, even if that player might actually play a lot of minutes, considering how injury probably prone this team is going to be next year.
Joseph Dycus joining us here on The Sports Leader. John Dickinson in Sports Phone here on a Wednesday night. What do you make of the conversation about gap year? How could you possibly have a gap year when Stephen Curry is 38? And I get it. They've aligned up, the finances to where they could have a lot of money either to spend in free agency or probably more realistically in the ability to take on big contracts via trade that maybe another team would want off of a player that's on a major deal. And that could be the pathway toward maybe adding another star for 2027-28 to bring in around Steph Curry. And I guess, in theory, although they haven't wanted to do it to this point, depending upon how Jimmy Butler's injury rehab and stuff goes, they could look to make a move at the deadline that could change the trajectory of what the following season would be. But what do you make of just running it back, of course, as we've been talking about, but then also sort of acknowledging the fact that the expectations are different? Because I would have thought that if you're tamping down the expectations, Joseph, you wouldn't have been fearful of change to the point where you run it back.
Yeah, I mean, I would kind of agree with that, but also I think that this is just how dynasties end. This is just it tends to be a very slow, painful, gradual. People get hurt, people get older. Look at how the Kobe Lakers ended, or even the Celtics with KG and Pierce and Ray Allen, Celtics of the 80s, Lakers of the 90s. Granted, with Lakers of the 90s, a little bit different. But it's, teams get old. Pieces start moving around. And this is just kind of how it is. You say a gap year, but I wonder, a gap of what though? Like, okay, is the expectation going to be next year you're going to spend a ton of money around Steph and Draymond and this kind of general core? Do you want to bring this core back? Can a team led by these two guys be a title contender at this point of their careers, or would they need to be kind of, not going to say supporting cast, obviously that's an insult to them, but guys that maybe, hey, take a little bit more of a backseat, or is it, I don't know, the future is just so wide open because they have kept all their draft picks and they will have all this cap space. What does the future look like? The future could look like any number of things.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but wouldn't part of that be, maybe Draymond is on a significant lower contract than he will be for this next year, where they basically redid the deal that he opted out of once they couldn't get LeBron James. I know Steph is up for extension. That's one of the pieces of business still ahead, in addition to filling out the other two roster spots and doing a Brandon Podziemski contract extension or not. They don't have to give Brandon Podziemski a contract extension. They could play it out to restricted free agency, although I think maybe that the Warriors don't want to necessarily go the restricted free agency route, considering the way last year went with
last year went. Yeah. No, you're right. I would have, from everything it sounds like getting Podziemski an extension is a priority. And then after that, it is kind of like, okay, Draymond is 37, I believe now.
Well, he's not making more than 27 next year. Like that,
exactly.
In fact, it might be half of that next year or less, honestly.
So yeah, you're right. The way that this team is going to look next year is going to be much different. Even if with some extensions, let's say Steph is eligible for, I believe, is a 2-year, 130. I had it written down somewhere, 30-something million. Like it's a lot of money,
65
right?
a year, roughly.
Yes. So you would expect him to sign that. I know that Mike Dunleavy said yesterday that obviously they want Steph back. They want him to be a Warrior for life. If Steph said to them, I want to leave, him and Joe Lacob, the owner, would talk about it, which I thought was kind of a stunning thing to say in a press conference like that. Just because it is like, and then Joe Lacob spoke with Tim Kawakami of the Standard today in his podcast, and Joe Lacob pushed back against that and said that, they are not thinking about trading Steph. Like that's not something they're thinking about. So yeah, it's interesting times in Golden State for sure.
Where do you think Steph is at with this thing? And I'll also ask you this. Do you think there's a scenario where Steph would wait, not necessarily because he wants to leave, but similar to Draymond, it could give them more financial flexibility for next offseason if they wind up looking to add somebody from the outside, and then they can sort of fold, because they could pay Steph that amount at any point. It's just the start date by which they could pay him on August the 29th. So would there be a scenario in your mind where he either waits and it doesn't happen right now, or he's willing to take a lesser number, which would keep a lot of that flexibility to add with the intent of him, of course, still being around for at least a few years to come?
I don't know if, I don't know if you're Steph Curry, do you want to take a pay cut? I mean, look at the building that I'm currently sitting in. Is this building here right now, if Steph Curry is not a 4-time NBA champion, 2-time MVP? I mean, he could ask himself, again, I'm not reporting anything. So
sure.
Just, I don't know why you would ask him to take a pay cut, like truly, because let's say he takes a pay cut, sure, but there's going to be other players out there, like we've talked about on this roster, that are not going to be on the books next year, that they're still going to have plenty of cap space, whether or not whether or not he signs this giant extension or not. And then I remember, I know that like he is as competitive as any athlete. He wants to win. But I remember in his exit interview, I went back and listened to it. He said, you can't keep saying championship. Maybe there needs to be some sort of recalibration of what does success look like, right? And so, look, maybe he does. Look at LeBron James. He took a 2-year, $8 million deal with Philadelphia. That is, I never would have thought that LeBron James would have taken anything under the maximum until his career ended. And yet he did it because he wants to win a championship. So maybe Steph does the same thing, but at the same time, I don't know if you also want to be known as an organization that asks their greatest player ever to take a pay cut.
Well, and look, career. I don't think they would ask necessarily.
Yeah.
I just think it would be part of the overall conversation. And I should make myself clear. I'm not saying the LeBron route of, hey, you're going to take essentially the veteran minimum to stay here, and he wouldn't have to. It's just the order of operations of maybe you wait on the extension, kind of like Draymond opted out and then got the money that was going to be coming to him anyway. But it gave the Warriors the flexibility to, have a certain amount of cap space open to them. And then you fill in Steph's money at the back end. Like, would Steph be willing to, hey, if we could go get player A and player B, but it meant you made 40 instead of 65, like that's really what we'd be talking about.
Yeah.
Okay. Not veteran minimum or.
Yeah, I know if you're like, I know if you're asking like, hey, Steph, can you make like $5 million a year next year?
No.
Oh man,
not at all. Not at all on that front. But more again, because I do think there could be. Look, Steph's worth every penny of it. If it's, and I understand exactly your point on not wanting to ask or anything like that, and he shouldn't necessarily have to do it. But if it would allow for the Warriors to have more maneuverability, to maybe have, as crazy as it sounds, the one more year run be the following, not this upcoming season, but the following season again, which in and of its own right, I think is maddening for Warrior fans to hear, Joseph, because it does feel like every year here, the last 3 or 4, the next year is more desirable on paper than the current year, which I think is, and they're running out of time because obviously he's just getting older during this time.
Yeah. And like, that's kind of the thing that I've like just talked to people about for the last, few months now. It's kind of like this idea that like, oh, we have to contend, which is certainly, I think if you're an NBA fan, you want your team to be a contender every single year, but also, how many teams are like championship contenders for, was it 13 straight years, 14 straight years with guys in their late 30s? Like, at a certain point, the ride has to end. And maybe this is just how it is. Steph is still an amazing player. Is it the worst thing in the world to just have a guy who's kind of fishing out his career and is still really good and doing it like that? I don't know.
Well, it is
But
if
also,
you're going to win 37 games, right? I mean, I think the flip
yeah,
side to that is, I mean, having a year, and look, part of that was injuries, and Dunleavy said that to you guys yesterday, just how
yeah,
much he believes in the roster if the roster could stay healthy. Again, where I would push back on his statement is that it's not really very realistic at all to expect that roster. In fact, that roster showed you last year that
yeah,
it can't stay healthy to the level at which you could say, hey, they're going to be a contender. So I think that's the flip side is, well, and if championship expectations are off the board, which I think, look, I mean, you mentioned, how dynasties end, the dynasty's over.
yeah.
They're not a contender right now. Now, could they be by the end of the year? I mean, maybe, but only if they make a
Yeah.
dramatic change to the roster via trade between now and the end
Mhm.
of the season. Could they be the following year? Maybe, if they make a dramatic change via trade or signing free agents, if they have a ton
Mhm.
of cap space and all of that. So I think that's where a lot of the angst is. Well, if you're not looking to be a title contender, then why keep essentially the
Yeah.
the same team?
One thing I'll say, I don't know if we're running out of time here, but like the thing with the Warriors is I don't know of any one move that they could make to make them a contender, right? But there's this, I do wonder sometimes, okay, you couldn't do that, but you could have made a bunch of smaller moves to make themselves more competitive, right? Now, would that be enough for the fans who are always going to be, we want championship number 5 for Steph, or championship number 5 in general? Who knows? But it, again, this is like, it's not, there's no easy answers for the situation because this thing has also gone on way longer, I think, than anyone could have predicted.
Yeah, no,
And
without a doubt.
this is the end of it.
No question. Final couple of minutes here with Joseph Dycus of the Mercury News and Bay Area News Group. We appreciate him for taking some time out. I do want to follow up on Podziemski just real quick. Do you think ultimately that Brandon Podziemski and the Warriors agree to a contract extension? And what range would you think that the money would be for BP?
I think that if you look at the range of a starting shooting guard, it is anywhere between about 15 million and 22 million. And that's kind of where I would expect his deal to be 4 or 5 years. Sorry, there's some noise in the background.
That's okay. You're good. Keep it rolling.
But people are going to look at that and think, I'm not reporting anything. They haven't come to an agreement. But let's say you look at the deal and it's like, 4 years, 80 million, or 5 years, 100 million, or 4 years, 97 million, something like that, right? They're going to be like, oh my gosh, that's crazy money. But in the modern NBA, where the salary cap is 209 million to get up to the first apron, 20 million a year is like 10% of your salary cap for a starting shooting guard. Like, that's not. Josh Hart's making 20 million. Max Strus, I think, is making 16 million. I mean, these are not guys that you would call all-stars, and yet they're making 15 to 20 something million. Devin Vassell is making 20 something million. So that's kind of the range that I would say Pod's making. And
yeah,
especially last year, he finished the season really strong and he played in every game. What more could you ask for, right? From a player.
No question. I think he probably is going to ultimately get somewhere between, I would say, 4 and 80 and 4 and 100. I think that's just realistic. And yeah, maybe there's a fifth year there too because he's their player, and you can add that to the mix. But I do think it's going to wind up being north of 20 million a year, or at least at the 20 million of 20 million a year in that ballpark. Shall we say. All right, final question for you, Joseph. And I want to just get your take on potential options to fill out the roster for the Warriors. You mentioned those 2 roster spots with GP2 now back and in the fold. Who do you think, what types of players do you think the Warriors are going to look at? Because Mike Dunleavy did say they're more apt to go into the year with 15 on the roster, which really means 13 healthy because Jimmy and Moses Moody are not going to be available.
Yeah, I think if you're looking at the roster, I know they brought Charles Bassey back. Look, one thing that you got, one thing that the guys or a guy that they're going to need on the roster is someone who can create off the dribble. But that's something they also needed last year, right? But are you going to find that player for the veteran minimum? I don't know. You could use an athletic wing. I know Yaxel Lundeborg, who I don't think we've really mentioned, he looked fantastic in the summer league. He's also one guy. It's him and Guy Santos. And you could use a wing. So you could this team could use a little bit of anything, obviously.
Yes. But for the veteran minimum, they could use another wing, and I still think they need a combo guard that can score. And maybe LJ Cryer winds up being one of those guys, but I think even with Melton, they need a combo guard that can score, because Melton is really more, I think, of a connector than a guy that looks to score the ball in that vein.
I mean, we can make a joke here. Jonathan Kuminga is still unsigned, right? Yeah. He's an athletic wing. That's not happening. I guarantee that's not happening. But you're going to be looking at guys that are, they're NBA players, they're minimum players, but you're not going to get these amazing starters for the last two roster spots. That's just kind of how it is.
Well, Joseph, I appreciate you taking some time. We went a little longer than I told you we would, so I owe you 5 minutes or so, brother. Thank you for joining me, and we'll talk again down the line soon.